Makena was a bright and hopeful young woman from Mbale. When she married Chisomo, she believed with all her heart that love would be enough. She gave him everything: her time, her care, her laughter, her prayers. In the beginning, he smiled back, but slowly, that smile faded. His eyes became distant. He stopped listening, stopped caring. The more she loved him, the colder he became. She kept trying. She cooked his favorite meals, wrote him little notes, even stayed quiet when he ignored her. She told herself, maybe tomorrow he will see how much I care, but tomorrow never came. There was always a wall between her and his family, especially his mother. From the first day, Makena felt the disapproval in her eyes. No matter what she did, it was never enough. If the food was too salty, it was her fault. If Chisomo was angry, it was her fault. Every visit turned into a quiet war, and Makena stood alone. Chisomo never defended her. Sometimes it felt like he agreed with them. The pressure built slowly, like water in a glass, until it almost drowned her. She would cry in the bathroom, pressing her hands over her mouth so no one would hear. She thought if she just held on a little longer, things would change. After all, wasn't love supposed to fix everything? But the truth was painful. Love, no matter how pure or deep, cannot grow where it is not well. And Makena was starting to realize she was not well. Makena was 7 months pregnant, her belly full of life, her heart still holding on to hope. She thought maybe the baby would change things. Maybe Chisomo would soften. Maybe his mother would finally accept her. Every night, she whispered to her unborn child, "You are my reason to stay strong." But inside that house, love was nowhere to be found. Instead, there were insults, sharp like knives. Blame followed her everywhere, for things she never did, for words she never said. If Chisomo came home angry, it was her fault. If dinner was late, if the house was quiet, if the rain fell too hard, somehow it was all her fault. His mother never stopped reminding her that she wasn't good enough. Sometimes the older woman would sit in the living room and speak loud enough for Makena to hear, calling her names, questioning the child in her womb, saying, "That baby won't bring you closer to my son." Makena tried to stay silent, to keep peace. She walked carefully, spoke gently, held back her tears. But silence didn't protect her. Every room in that house carried tension. Even the baby's kicks, those tiny reminders of joy, couldn't stop the pain inside her chest. She would lie in bed at night, holding her stomach, whispering, "You're innocent. You didn't ask for this." She missed being seen. She missed being loved. She felt like a shadow in her own life, present but invisible. She smiled for the neighbors. She laughed for the aunties who visited. But inside, she was breaking, piece by piece. No one saw how she cried into her pillow, begging God for just one day of kindness. One night, as she stood in the kitchen cutting vegetables, Chisomo walked in and looked at her like a stranger. No love, no warmth, just cold eyes. And in that moment, Makena knew she wasn't just carrying a baby. She was carrying herself through a storm she didn't ask for, a storm she no longer knew how to survive. And yet somehow, through the hate in that house, she held on to that tiny hope inside her. Because if she gave up, who would protect the little life growing inside her? It was raining that night, the kind of rain that felt like the sky itself was crying. Makena stood by the bedroom door, tired and swollen, her belly heavy with the life growing inside her. She had just asked Chisomo why he hadn't come home the night before. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. She just asked. But something in him snapped. He turned around, eyes burning with anger. "Leave!" he shouted. "Take your bastard with you!" His words hit harder than any slap. She froze. Did he really mean it? Was this the end? Before she could even answer, he grabbed her small bag and threw it at her feet. "Get out of my house," he said again, louder this time, like he was throwing out trash. Makena stood there in silence. Her hands rested on her belly, as if trying to shield her unborn child from the hatred around them. Her feet were bare. Her dress was old and wet from earlier chores. All she had was a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. No money, no phone, no one to call. She stepped out into the rain. The cold hit her skin like tiny knives. The wind blew hard, but she didn't turn back. Not even when she heard the door slam behind her. Not even when her tears mixed with the rain. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her heart was breaking, but she kept walking. She didn't know where to go. She just knew she had to leave. People watched from behind curtains, from half-closed doors, but no one said a word. No one offered help. The streetlight flickered above her as she walked through puddles, trying not to fall. One hand on her belly, the other holding the shawl close. She whispered to her baby, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." That night, Makena lost everything. Her home, her safety, her dignity. But deep inside, something else started to grow. Not hate, not revenge, but a small voice. One that said, "You are still here. You are still alive." And even though she had nothing in her hands, she was carrying the beginning of everything. Makena didn't remember falling. One moment, she was walking in the rain, cold and weak, and the next, everything went dark. Her legs gave up. Her body couldn't take it anymore. She collapsed by the roadside, her belly soaked, her lips whispering silent prayers. She thought that maybe this was the end. Maybe no one would find her. Maybe her baby would never get to see the world. But someone did find her. A warm hand touched her cheek, then another gently lifted her head. "Child, wake up," a soft voice said. It was an old woman with kind eyes and hands rough from years of work. Her name was Ayo. She didn't ask Makena where she came from or what had happened. She just saw a broken woman and offered shelter. Ayo helped her up slowly and took her to a tiny hut nearby, just one room, with a low bed and a small fire burning in the corner. She wrapped Makena in a dry cloth, made her some hot tea, and placed a warm bowl of porridge in her hands. Makena couldn't stop crying, not just from pain, but from the shock of kindness. After all the hate, all the rejection, a stranger had given her what her own home never did: care. That night, as the fire crackled, Ayo sat beside her and said something Makena would never forget. "Your pain is not punishment, it's power in disguise." Those words sank deep into Makena's soul. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever told her that the suffering she carried might one day become strength. Ayo didn't speak like a stranger. She spoke like someone who had been through storms too, and survived them. Over the next few days, Ayo fed her, gave her clean clothes, and even found herbs to ease the heaviness in her body. She didn't have much, but she gave everything she could. And Makena, for the first time in a long time, felt safe. She didn't know where life would take her next, but one thing had changed. She now believed there was still goodness in the world, because sometimes all it takes is one stranger, one soft voice, one act of love to change a broken woman's destiny. 3 weeks after finding shelter in Ayo's small hut, Makena went into labor. It was the middle of the night, and the sky was full of stars. She held her belly, breathing through the pain, sweat running down her face. Ayo sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering prayers and comforting words. There was no hospital, no doctor, no fancy equipment, just 2 women, a wooden floor, and a whole lot of faith. After hours of labor, a cry filled the room, then another. Makena couldn't believe it. Not one, but 2 babies, twins, a boy and a girl, tiny, warm, and perfect in her arms. She cried as she held them close, her heart overflowing with love and relief. After everything she had been through, this moment felt like a miracle. But then, as Ayo cleaned the babies, she noticed something different. The boy's skin looked lighter in patches, uneven, almost like paint strokes across his tiny body. Ayo paused. She had seen this before. It was a rare skin condition, not harmful, just different. But Makena already knew what the village would say, and she was right. Word spread quickly. Some people came to see the babies out of curiosity. Others whispered behind her back. "They're cursed," some said. "It's a bad sign," others muttered. The stares, the gossip, the cruel words, they came like waves. But Makena didn't flinch. She looked down at her son and daughter and gave them names that came straight from her heart. She named the boy Zuberi, meaning strength, because he was born fighting, and she named the girl Sanaa, meaning art, because her presence felt like beauty after a storm. "They are not cursed," Makena said to anyone who would listen. "They are chosen." Even when people pulled away, Makena stood tall. She wrapped her babies in clean cloths, sang to them every night, and kissed their foreheads like the world hadn't broken her. She didn't have much, no husband, no money, no family nearby, but she had Zuberi and Sanaa, and that was enough. In a world that called her children strange, she chose to call them powerful, and with every heartbeat, every breath, Makena began to believe. Maybe her story wasn't over, maybe it was just beginning. In the quiet nights, after Zuberi and Sanaa had fallen asleep, Makena would sit outside the hut with a candle and write. At first, she didn't have paper, So she used leaves, big, wide banana leaves. She wrote with bits of charcoal, telling her story. The pain, the shame, the silence, the strength. Every word came from her heart. She didn't know if anyone would ever read it. She just needed to let it out. Then one day, Io brought her a small notebook and a pen. "You have a voice," she said. "Use it." Makena started writing every day. Her words were raw, honest, sometimes messy. She wrote about the night she was thrown out, about giving birth alone, about the people who called her babies cursed. But she also wrote about hope, about how Zuberi smiled in his sleep, about how Sanaa curled her tiny fingers around hers, about how pain could turn into power. Later, a local youth helped her create a Facebook page using his old phone. Makena didn't think much of it. She just posted one piece of her story at a time. She called it From Tears to Light. Slowly, people began to notice. Women started messaging her, from nearby villages, towns, even other countries. Some were pregnant and alone. Some had been hurt by family. Some had lost everything. They all said the same thing. "Your story feels like mine." Makena couldn't believe it. She, the woman once pushed out with nothing, was now helping others stand. Her pain, once a heavy secret, had become a lifeline for someone else. She shared photos of her twins. She talked about life in the hut. She didn't pretend everything was perfect. She showed the struggle and the strength. Her words made people cry, made people think, made people speak. A movement was growing, one post at a time. Suddenly, she wasn't just Makena the outcast. She was Makena the writer, Makena the mother, Makena the fire that refused to go out. And in a world that once tried to silence her, she found her voice, and it echoed farther than she ever dreamed. One night, while her twins slept beside her, Makena sat quietly with her borrowed phone and typed the most personal post she had ever written. The title was bold, raw, and full of truth. "My husband threw me out pregnant. I gave birth to fire." She didn't hold back. She wrote about the rain, the pain, the empty road, the fear, the stranger's stares, and the moment she almost gave up. But more than that, she wrote about how she survived, how she gave birth to twins, how one was different and beautiful, how love can grow in the ashes of hate. She clicked post and closed the phone. She didn't expect anything. She just needed to free the weight in her chest. By morning, her life had changed. Thousands of people had shared her story. Comments poured in from every corner. Women, men, students, mothers, even people overseas. Some wrote, "I've never cried like this before." Others said, "Thank you for speaking what so many of us feel." Her page, which once had only a few followers, suddenly exploded with support, prayers, and love. Non-governmental organizations began to reach out. Women's groups, community leaders, even journalists. They wanted to know her, to hear more, to help her. One organization offered to sponsor her writing. Another invited her to speak at a women's forum. For the first time in her life, people weren't looking down on her. They were lifting her up. Makena stood on a stage just months later, her voice shaking but strong. She told her story to a full room. She looked into the eyes of women who had also been pushed out, who had also cried in the dark, and she told them, "You are not weak, you are becoming fire." Within a year, she was invited onto national TV. She wore a second-hand dress and carried photos of Zuberi and Sanaa in her bag. She sat in the studio lights, nervous but proud. The host asked her how she made it through, and Makena smiled softly and said, "Because I had no choice but to rise." That post, written on a quiet night in a tiny hut, became the beginning of everything. She had shared her wounds, and the world had turned them into wings. Shizomo was driving through town when he saw it. He wasn't expecting it. He wasn't even paying attention, just glancing out of the window, stuck in traffic. But then he saw the billboard, tall, bright, impossible to miss. And there she was, Makena, smiling, glowing, holding Zuberi and Sanaa in her arms like the queen she had become. His heart stopped. At the bottom of the billboard were the words, "Rise Mothers Foundation, founded by Makena, supporting abandoned pregnant women across Africa." He blinked, hoping he was imagining it, but it was real. The same woman he once shouted at, the same woman he threw out into the rain, the woman he called useless, nothing, a burden. That woman was now the face of hope, of strength, of a whole movement. He pulled over and just sat there. His hands were shaking. His pride, which once stood so tall, crumbled in silence. He remembered the night he told her to leave, the fear in her eyes, her swollen feet, the rain falling as she stepped into the dark, barefoot and alone. Back then, he thought she wouldn't survive without him. But now she was everywhere. He turned on the radio. Her voice was on a talk show. He opened social media. Her face filled the screen. People were quoting her words, praising her strength, calling her a hero. She had become everything he never believed she could be, and more. A part of him wanted to be proud. Another part felt shame so deep it burned. He had thrown away gold, and now the world was watching it shine. He drove home slowly, her face still in his mind. That smile, that peace, that power. She didn't look angry. She looked free, and the truth hit him hard. He didn't break her. He built her fire, and now she was lighting the way for women everywhere. Chisomo sat on the edge of his bed that night, staring into nothing. He didn't know what to say. What could he say? The woman he once pushed aside had risen high enough for the whole world to see. One warm afternoon, as Makena was leaving a women's event, she saw him standing near the gate, flowers in one hand, eyes full of regret. Chisomo, the man who once threw her out into the rain, now stood trembling, waiting for her. He looked smaller than she remembered, not in size, but in spirit. The pride that once filled his voice was gone. He didn't speak at first. He just stared, tears slowly falling down his face. "Makena," he whispered. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I didn't know. I didn't see." He handed her the flowers. His hands were shaking. His voice cracked as he talked about how he'd been watching her on TV, reading her posts, seeing the shelters she built. He said he was proud. He asked if maybe they could start over, that maybe she could forgive him. Makena didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who hurt her, but the man who unknowingly unlocked something inside her. There was no hate in her heart, no bitterness, just peace, a quiet strength he had never seen before. She smiled gently, holding her head high. "You helped me give birth to more than babies," she said softly. "You pushed me into power." He stood there speechless. "I used to think I needed your love to survive," she continued. "But now I know. I only needed to love myself." The silence between them was full, but not heavy. Makena handed the flowers back. "I thank you," she said, "not for what you did, but for where it led me." Then she walked past him, her dress flowing behind her like a cape, her heels clicking against the ground like a beat of triumph. She didn't look back, not because she was cold, but because she had finally healed. And she knew now, real love doesn't hurt, abandon, or belittle. It lifts. Makena didn't need revenge. She had something better, freedom. And as she walked toward her car, where Zuberi and Sanaa waited with smiles and open arms, Makena knew deep in her soul, the past no longer had power over her. She had already risen. Years later, Makena stands on a bright stage, microphone in hand, a soft smile on her face. Cameras flash. The audience is quiet, hanging on her every word. Behind her is a banner that reads, "Rise Mothers Foundation, 3 shelters, 200 women employed, 1,000 mothers reached every year." The girl who once walked barefoot in the rain, belly heavy and heart broken, now walks in power, confident, calm, and full of grace. Her name is known across the country. Schools invite her to speak. Women line up to hug her. News stations follow her story. And in every shelter she's built, there's a bed for the woman who has nowhere else to go. There's food, safety, dignity, hope. Makena didn't just survive. She became a shelter for others. And somewhere, miles away, Chisomo watches her on TV. He's alone. He stares at the screen as she speaks with strength in her voice, wearing a bright dress, her twins standing proudly beside her. They're growing fast. Zuberi and Sanaa, the children he never held. The interviewer asks Makena what she would tell women going through what she went through. She pauses, then says with steady eyes, "Never let the one who broke you define you." The audience claps. Some cry. Chisomo doesn't move. He knows those words are about him, but she doesn't say his name. She doesn't need to. Makena didn't get revenge. She found her purpose. And in doing so, she became something more powerful than anything he could have imagined. She became a revolution.